we did the whole countdown and everything, but I hadn't pushed the go live button.
Okay. That means you didn't go live.
So we are now live
Okay.
post countdown, because that is an important button. So I think it's a very appropriate way to start out our 5th episode, maybe, of What Could Go Wrong live with What Could Go Wrong. So everybody meet Elaine. She is awesome, and I'm gonna let you introduce yourself because you would do that better than me, I feel like.
Oh, well, I'll tell you. Chelsea, thank you so much for having me on. This is already going to be a blast, I can tell.
Yeah, I remembered to push the go live button before we started talking, which is very important.
Important. Go live. Must do, okay, to make it work. So you mentioned in the little ad that you sent out about this conversation that I'm the founder of the Trauma Sensitive Teaching Network, which is a network of professionals, teachers, counselors, social workers, leaders, psychologists, principals, superintendents who have a common purpose of coming together to do trauma sensitive teaching, because we have a lot of kids that are experiencing trauma in the school. So it's a network to help support that. And I also am adjunct faculty at Cleveland State University. I've taught in the College of Education, and I am currently teaching in the School of Social Work. So, but that's the boring stuff. I'm also a mom of 3 20-somethings, all college graduates. And this is the 30th year that I've known my husband. So, you know, we've traveled some ways.
That's something, yeah.
Yeah. So our life has been full of all kinds of social and emotional stuff. So it's fitting that we're going to be talking.
So it's the perfect conversation.
Yeah, perfect conversation for sure.
Well, so if you people are here, hang out in the chat because that's more fun when your messages pop up, and feel free to make jokes about me forgetting to push go live and all those types of things. But to what you were saying, so sometimes when people start talking about trauma, they think, car accidents and these types of things. So when you talk about trauma, it could be different things. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, so trauma is actually very individual, because it can be a car accident, like you said, or something traumatic physically that happens to an individual. But it also could be any other life circumstance that creates a sense of trauma in an individual. So it could be some type of abuse, it could be neglect, it could be their experiences with poverty, it could be their experiences in the neighborhood, it could be anything that an individual finds traumatic. So for example, what I find traumatic may not necessarily be what you would find traumatic or someone else would find traumatic. So it's a pretty broad definition, and it's pretty individually defined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've introducing this concept of trauma-informed learning or trauma-safe environments or whatever. Mm-hmm. A lot of the pushback that you get initially when starting the conversation is people hear the word trauma and they're like, we don't have any trauma here, Right. I mean, that's kind of, and so that word sounds kind of scary, but it's really just talking about individualized experiences and how it affected the person. Sure. And hey, there's people here. Hey.
Welcome.
I get distracted, obviously. I'm like, before we started, you were talking about, we were talking about education, podcasts, and conversations, and how sometimes there's no laughter involved in those conversations. And you made a funny statement that I would love for you to repeat, just for me, really. I think it's just for me.
Okay, just for you, Chelsea. I'll tell you that, it's an education podcast, and, I've been an academic, I've been a leader in a nonprofit, everything's serious, we got to talk about education and ensure we're handling everything. And I thought, wow, talking with Chelsea is going to be a little bit more, not as serious. It's kind of like if President Obama goes on Jimmy Kimmel and they have this great conversation and they're laughing and joking and it's all serious because he's the president, but at the same time he can laugh and joke.
I don't feel like you're wrong, because I gotta say,
with you, Chelsea.
I love Jimmy Kimmel, and I'm okay with that comparison. And I have to say, I was talking with an educator the other day, beautiful, intelligent, amazing educator. And I said, hey, maybe you should come on What Could Go Wrong live with me. And they were like, no. And I was like, why?
I have worked with kids in the classroom from kids kindergarten through 12th grade, and then, also college students. And, if anything's going to happen or anything can go wrong, it can go wrong in the classroom. I've seen it. I've been there.
Totally.
With the kids. So.
Yeah, and that's what makes it more fun. I mean, that's the whole what could go wrong thing, is because you're going to have more fun that way. And one more thing, and then we'll get back to actually what we're talking about. But yesterday I was having a conversation with another educator, and we were talking about preschool teachers and educators in general. We're like, you know what? I am pretty sure that 99% of preschool teachers or any early educators have some form of ADHD. Like, they have to have it just to survive in the classroom.
Place, right?
I just feel like I have ADHD. I don't know if it expresses in any way, but I do have that, and I also taught preschool, and I could say that is accurate. And hey, Jacob, I did get distracted. You did that on purpose. Okay, so tell me, what does that look like to come in? I just feel like if you're going to come into a setting and say, hey, let's create a trauma-safe environment, what does that mean? How would you even start that process with someone who doesn't understand what you're saying?
Yeah, so we start with awareness. We start with awareness of what trauma is, and understanding what that looks like for individual kids in the classroom. And sometimes we'll have to also look at what that looks like for the teachers and the staff, because we all come to the world with certain experiences, some more traumatic than others, but being aware of what those things are really important so that we can understand triggers. We often see that with kids' behaviors. If we're not understanding what's happening with a student, we'll misinterpret that behavior, and we need to be able to look past the behavior to see, instead of saying what's wrong with you, we're asking what happened to you. So that's a key shift when we're doing trauma-informed care, when we're using trauma-sensitive instructional decisions in the classroom. We're keeping in mind what trauma history might be there, and also what the triggers are that may have the child reacting in a way that seems way out of proportion to what the situation is. So it's getting everybody on the same page and having a common language and an understanding that we're not saying what's wrong with you. We're saying what happened to you.
Common language is huge. I mean, that was a big thing that when I was leading staff, we talked about common language and what we do say, what we don't say, because that plays such a vital role in your conversation. I mean, especially in early education, because sometimes we have to prompt responses, but also in education in a bigger picture. And so common language is a big thing. And I think common language has to really come from this space of a common mindset. Like, we understand this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it. And here's the language that kind of grows from that, because after it's taught, it has to be maintained, which can be challenging. So when you're bringing that into a setting, what does that look like? What's your first kind of hurdle to get that common language to be embedded in kind of what's going on there?
Well, there's always training involved, training by way of information, training by way of tools. For example, one of the tools that we would use in a trauma-informed classroom or trauma-informed school or organization, one of the tools is a community meeting where we come together, and whether it's staff coming together or whether it's classrooms starting in their day, there's a community meeting where we ask 3 questions. How are you feeling? What is your goal for today? And who can you ask for help? So that's a foundational way to gain some community, sense of community among the students, and then the staff, among the staff as well, and then among the students as well, to be able to establish that sense of community where, it matters how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And we do want to have goals. Regardless of how we're feeling, we need to be able to also articulate goals, because that's a human thing and an adult thing that we need to learn about. Even if we're frustrated or angry or disappointed, that we can still set goals about what we're going to do for that class or for the day. And then always being able to say, who can you ask for help? And
I think that's such a valuable question.
Yeah, who can you ask for help? And sometimes we'll hear students or staff sometimes say, well, I'm just going to handle that myself. And we encourage that thinking about, well, who can you ask for help? So the community meeting is a foundational tool, for example, that a trauma-informed setting might use.
I like that. Giving them kind of a specific action that they can take when they're feeling overwhelmed, which can be a big thing. Is it when you're feeling overwhelmed, you suddenly lose the ability for this executive function to kind of roll. So you need this automatic response. So once you know this is my automatic response when I'm feeling overwhelmed, when you're stuck in your amygdala, you're just like, I know this response. Who can I ask for help? Right. It has to be trained so that you can use it in a time where you don't have that executive function telling you this is a good decision.
Yes, exactly. That's an amygdala hijack. Once you're hijacked, you're not in that thinking part of your brain anymore, right?
Yeah, we talk about going to your downstairs brain, your upstairs brain, right? The whole child, the whole brain child, that book is we brought that into a lot of our trainings. And so we trained that was part of our common language was in your upstairs brain, your downstairs brain. And we would have students come back and say, like, if we're talking with them and saying, how are you? Can you tell me how you're feeling? They would be like, Miss Chelsea, I am in my downstairs brain. And I'm like, okay, all right, well, just come back to me when you're feeling your upstairs brain. And we had peace corners and things like that where they could go and take some time to regulate themselves, to kind of experience self-regulation, because you need to experience it in practice.
Exactly.
And so they would do their self-regulation. They would come back and be like, you know what, Miss Chelsea, I'm in my upstairs brain now. I'm like, great. Now let's solve the problem.
Yeah. Access to the upstairs brain, being in the downstairs brain is in that place, right? For our viewers, where it's the reptilian brain, right? It's at the brain stem level, and they call it the reptilian brain because that was the most original part of our development, was that part of that brain in the brain stem, and that's regulating our breathing, our heart rate, just our normal functions, day to day. And when we're in that place, we're in survival mode, and you're just trying to fight. You might want to flee. You might want to freeze. And so being able to help teach kids that regulation so that they can come out of that state is so, so important. And for some kids, maybe who have experienced some developmental trauma, which is essentially something happening very traumatic to a child during those early years of their development. If it happens in a particular point in time, it impacts the brain development, right? And so that makes it even more challenging for students to be able to access and, come out of that brain stem, that limbic system that's so emotional and not thinking. It's difficult for them to come up to that thinking part. So teaching those skills to mitigate the impact or the residual effects of trauma is so important.
Because those skills, as they're using, they're building the neural pathways to make those skills happen.
Yep.
And if they don't have those skills, then they're still building neural pathways, but they're not healthy. And then they're taking longer times to break them down.
Yes.
Because they're having to learn them later rather than building them at the beginning. And that was one of my favorite parts of being involved in early childhood, is because we're building strong neural pathways from the get-go.
Right.
And then by the time they're getting to primary and secondary, they're just kind of refining the neural pathways rather than having to like burn them down and start all over. And that's part of my obsession with early education. But I think so much of trauma sensitive environments, trauma-informed learning comes from this basis of relationship. And my friend Alfonso is not here, but I was on his podcast a while back, and he has a podcast called My EdTech Life. And every question he asked me, the answer was pretty much relationship. He was like, how do we solve da, da, da? I'm like, relationship. I wish that I could give you a different answer, but I just feel like relationship is the answer to all of that. And so tell me about how relationship plays into this trauma-informed space or trauma-informed environment.
Oh, 100%. That's what you're saying, because typically trauma, or in many cases, trauma happens in the context of a relationship. Okay. If there is,
and sorry, adversely, resilience is shown to be formed most strongly inside of positive relationships, which is an interesting, both sides of the coin.
Yes, absolutely. So that's where that, in order to heal that trauma or to put those building blocks of the brain together to develop the skills to be able to self-regulate and to be able to develop positive relationships, it has to happen. That healing happens in the context of relationships. So teachers know about relationships, or psychologists, counselors will talk about the Therapeutic Alliance, a therapeutic relationship, and essentially, therapeutic comes from the Greek word therapevo, which means to heal. So when we talk about doing something therapeutic,
I love it when you teach me new things.
Yeah, therapevo, Greek word for to heal.
Okay, wait, how do you say it? One more time.
Therapevo.
I'm not going to try it. Okay. I believe you, and I'm not going to try it because I will look ridiculous, but I love that I learned that.
Yeah, that's the basis of the word therapeutic. It's about healing, and it happens in the context of the relationship, and it could be the relationship with the teacher, it could be a relationship with the counselor, it could be a relationship with the office manager or the custodian in the school. It could be a trusted friend. It could be, an aunt or an uncle. So terapevo, somebody wants that. Okay, so it comes from terapevo, or let's start with therapeutic. THERAPEUTIC. So therapeutic, from the Greek word therapevo. Theta, epsilon, rho, alpha, epsilon, omega. A therapeutic.
I was going to attempt to type that, but I'm just going to backspace.
Yeah, you can translate it in Google Translate.
There you go, Michael. You're welcome. That was just for you.
He's the studious one in the group, it looks like.
He is. He's the only studious one. The rest of them are a bunch of shenanigans. I love you, by the way, but you're a shenanigan. It's fine. Okay, continue. Tell us more about the relationship. That's where we were.
So it's in the Therapeutic Alliance. It's in the therapeutic relationship, and along that, when we think about therapeutic relationship, and I'm talking about in education as well, it is, it's about safety. It's about trust. It's about being able to be vulnerable, to express the trauma at the degree and at the pace that the individual is ready for. This is why I love bibliotherapy,
Yeah.
where we're taking children's literature and using characters going through different types of situations in their lives, either developmentally or, particular issues maybe around death or bullying. And we're able to use the context of the book for a student to experience a once removed perspective so that they can process through an issue regarding a character in a book, and they can talk about themselves, but they don't have to.
Yeah, that once removed perspective changes the whole game, changes the whole conversation. Suddenly they're willing to have all of these deep conversations that they wouldn't have from the first person, but you remove that perspective and suddenly they're talking about the character and they'll share all kinds. I mean, I've seen it in practice. It's amazing to see.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And that creates that safety, and it's something that can happen in a classroom environment with a cohesive group and a teacher that is tuned into and has that withedness to be able to tune into students in terms of how they're feeling and what they need at any given moment. So
yeah,
that's powerful. And teachers are in a really powerful place to do a lot of.
Yes. Yeah. And I think a lot of times, so the school I was at prior, when I came in, we introduced this concept of a trauma-informed environment. We introduced growth mindset, trauma-informed, and holistic education. And these were all new things to the teachers that I was working with. We also switched out the whole curriculum. So we went to Reggio Inspired, which is naturally relationship-based. And for those of you who may not know, Reggio Inspired is just a very hands-on, play-based, child-led type curriculum. So it's process over product. It's, the educator kind of follows the lead of the child. It's very natural, hands-on, other types of things. But these were all new concepts. And so as we're introducing them and seeing it play out, you could see this shift for the whole community starts to just change the way that we talk to each other and the way that we engage, the way the students feel when they come in the morning, the way the teachers feel when they get there in the morning, because we're modeling this behavior for the children. And just because we have to model it for the children, we're then having to treat each other, with that same, not what's wrong, but hey, what's going on? How are you? And we're seeing this change. And the coolest thing was, it was the educators who started saying, I'm feeling this change. I'm using it with my family. I'm feeling it at work. Like, it became this ripple effect where suddenly we thought we were just helping the children, but in reality, we were impacting the whole community without even really trying, without even really having that as our set intention when we started. And I think that's huge. And so aside from no, go ahead.
No, I was saying, yeah, absolutely.
Woo, yeah. Aside from just the trauma
community, it's a healing community then. Absolutely.
Yes, it changes the whole concept. And so she's not here either, but Kamal did oh my gosh, wait, I got it. I can find it. A poll. She did a poll about what's the biggest part of education that we're missing. And it was like financial literacy, social emotional, something and something, I can't remember. But here's what my response, they were great. I mean, right? These are great ones. And I wish she was here because she could tell me. And I don't see anybody else on here that responded to that, but I can't remember. Anyway, my response was, I think social emotional is a huge piece to focus on because you're building the foundation for everything else to come. Because if you put financial literacy into a classroom, you're doing great things. But if that child does not feel a sense of belonging, a sense of safety, and a sense of psychological safety, then they're not going to retain that information. So it would seem that we have to start at the bottom and create this social emotional strength in the child, the psychological safety, the trauma-informed space, that then we can take all these other beautiful things like financial literacy and stack them on top of that foundation. Right? Or kind of what's your experience with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just read a statistic this week that said that 92% of employers that were surveyed um, were saying that social emotional and emotional intelligence, the way they address it for adults, right?
Mm-hmm.
Emotional intelligence is as important or even more important than technical skill on the job. Because you have
100%.
a technical skill, but you can't do your work because there's so much conflict or, inability to self-regulate or be self-aware.
Oh, I mean, you're back to the upstairs brain, downstairs brain,
Right.
right? I mean, no matter how many technical skills you have, if you can't work an executive function, it doesn't matter. You can't type. I know,
Exactly.
I've experienced it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do that. And here's what I want to say. I believe that social and emotional learning is a must prerequisite to emotional intelligence and social intelligence in adults.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
No way
I totally agree
for
with
it.
that.
And yet
Yeah.
we expect adults, right? Our young adults, kids in college and then people going into the workforce to be emotionally intelligent, and not
Mm-hmm.
just the leaders, but everyone that we're working with to be emotionally intelligent. Well, what's the foundation that
Yeah.
expectation comes from? So why wouldn't we be doing it consistently for all kids in K-12 education?
I mean, it's like telling them to, when you turn 16, I want you to be a good driver, but we're going to give you no training up until this point.
Right,
And then suddenly something should switch. And then all of a sudden they should be emotionally intelligent because they're 18, 19, 20, but there's
right.
no foundation. That just doesn't make any sense. And
Absolutely.
Michael asked an interesting question. How does the principal and school board view these changes? In your experience, what have you kind of seen on that front?
I've been fortunate in my own experience working for an organization that serves kids and families, and the kids have emotional and behavioral challenges. The mission is all about helping the troubled and troubling kids.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the organization's mission was about. We took mental health and social emotional learning, trauma informed care, and integrated it with academic content to give
Mm-hmm.
kids the best opportunity to be able to be successful, in their public schools or whatever schools they were coming from. And so, the support was founded. It's coming from the mission of the organization. So, in my experience, I've had amazing experiences with that. I also know and talk to social emotional learning coaches in different school districts, assistant principals who are often dealing with behavior. And it really depends on the culture of that school. If the
Yeah.
leadership is committed to making that happen and providing the supports and the resources and establishing that type of culture that makes it possible, then it works well. I've also talked with teachers, social emotional learning coaches, and other people who they want to do it, and they're doing it in isolation, in pockets,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
not in a very integrated way, because it's not something that is a priority for a particular leadership team. So I think it
Yeah.
really depends on the belief. Now, I can tell you that now with the pandemic, the
Mm-hmm.
truth is kids have been traumatized.
Right.
Have been separated from those things that to which they belong. Things have been inconsistent. There's a sense of not feeling safe
Right.
physically, and
Right.
kids have had their teachers die. The families have had losses, and so there's been so much trauma in that regard happening that we're seeing the impact is it having on kids, and especially
Right.
kids aren't connected to school where they have, especially those kids that have not been in session, because we know that some schools haven't been in session for a year, and some have been hybrid, and there have been some that have been in depending on where you are in the country. But all of that connection that kids had with school, the bottom fell out, and everyone's experienced trauma now. So,
and I think that's kind of a good thing in the sense of a very bad thing, is that for once we can all agree that our kids have experienced a collective trauma. Whereas before, I don't know about you, but a lot of times when I was bringing up this topic, like I said at the beginning, there was a lot of pushback of, oh, well, these kids, they don't have trauma. They haven't experienced, this, that, and the other. Right. But now that part of the conversation is like an automatic, yes, we've all experienced collective trauma. So that's kind of set aside. But back to what you had said about the culture of the school being a huge indicator of whether or not, the school board and the leadership kind of picks this up is dead on. And I serve on a Cognia accreditation review team sometimes. So we go into districts and review, and it's interesting to hear them talk about sometimes what their priorities are. Because sometimes if they speak to, our priorities are SEL, our priorities are trauma informed, our priorities are, and yet their practice doesn't match what they're saying that their priority is. And so I feel like they do have this as a priority in their mind, but they have not gone from this is our priority to here's our practice in the classroom. And I'm going to ask you kind of what you think, but what I've seen is it's a big non-quantifiable concept, this giant boulder to roll up a hill to say we're going to create a trauma-informed environment. And so to say we want trauma-informed, we want SEL is awesome. But to put it into practice can be really scary because there's a higher rate of failure, if you will, because it's hard to quantify, and it's a big thing to undertake, right? So what is kind of what's been your experience with that concept where your priorities and their practices are a little bit off?
In looking at school districts, and I'm in Ohio. And actually, I have to say Michael's comment about we should be focused on supportive relationships instead of adding to trauma by blindly moving ahead with curriculum plans. Yes.
Yeah. I'm just going to throw a little Michael party. Yes, Michael.
It's like we need to kind of get to where the kids are and go from there. And I'll tell you, I have been particularly sensitive to that when we talk about the varying priorities, because at one point, part of my role in an agency was as state testing coordinator. So even though we were in this organization whose mission was to help kids socially, emotionally, we still had to administer the state tests.
Correct.
And so we had to prepare the kids and, cover content that was,
because you're not going to get funded if you're not, you lose your funding, and then
because the
everything's
testing,
gone.
Right? They test, the English, the math. And so you have to take these, and they've been called all kinds of tests depending on where you are. We have graduation tests, could have been, tests on the Common Core. Way back,
it was we have a STAR test in Texas.
Exactly. So each state has its version of that. And it was very challenging to, especially working with kids that were really, really struggling with anxiety.
It's like forget their emotional needs right now. We really have to get them to pass this test. It's backwards.
I know, right?
On academics, and then social emotional, like little things on the top.
Exactly. And so I think that this is a time now that is giving us an opportunity to see how that needs to change. We absolutely, test. Oh my goodness. And so really hard for me because I was responsible to make sure all the kids got tested, but at the same time, I knew what their struggles were. There were some kids coming in not having anything to eat at home, or kids that were coming from parents who were somehow incapacitated, either by their own depression, their own issues, or, some drug involvement. And it is like just, heartbreaking to need to do that. So, but I think that now is the time to see it, because we see things like increase in drug use, increased suicide among younger kids. Like, we can't ignore those signs. You know?
This is lack of I mean, we're talking about they're picking up their own coping skills. They're creating coping skills for what's going on in all of this. Let's see. Michael says, I'm starting a petition to get the U.S. Department of Ed to waive state tests in the spring. Who's in?
Absolutely. Oh, yep.
We have
former district state testing coordinator. Absolutely. And I think at least we need to stop. Now, here's an assessment that I think would be valuable to do. So instead of kind of diving right back in and assessing the reading and the math, sure, those assessments are important. But when we're looking at the social emotional side, if I was in the classroom now, what I'd be advising teachers and schools to be doing is doing empathy maps with kids, using that as an assessment. So an empathy map, meaning we're going to ask the kids, you know, what have you been seeing? And having them, you know, either artistically or in conversation talk about that. What have you been hearing? You know, what have you been feeling about what's happening, so that we can get information about where the kids have been out there in the world in this pandemic. Like, I try not to watch TV that often, but how many times do you have to see the you know, the insurrection at the state capitol? How traumatic is that? How many times do you have to see that? And kids are,
I only need to see it once.
You know, they're witnessing all that, and you know, a lot of kids are fortunate and they have families that wrap their arms around their kids and they're there for them. But a lot of families don't have those resources, or it's a single parent working, or, you know, there are many children. And even if people are working, if they are working, maybe their parents aren't working right now, or maybe they are working, but they're at home, locked down in pandemic, and not able to give that full attention to what kids are experiencing. So so you've got me on a rant. I think it started with the issue about the testing.
Well, you know, when Michael comes, somebody's gonna rant about something, and that's the beauty that he brings. Is like, these are the things that we need to fix. I want to address Mark's question. So Mark Middleberg is awesome. He's a huge growth mindset he was a coach. And so I've gotten to talk with him some, and he's really cool. But he says,
what kind of coach?
He was a football coach.
Oh, I played basketball.
I volleyball, so I got nothing.
Okay, I played volleyball too. That's cool.
Yeah. So he says, the system is the problem, and yes, relationship and development of the relationship. Yes, relationship and development of the relationship is critical, but how to do both, strengthen relationship and push development forward. So here's my thought, and we touched on it a little bit before, is these things are not separate. We don't have academic development and relationship building. They're not separate. Everything that we're doing inside of the classroom is interdependent of each other. And so having a foundation of a relationship, that sense of belonging and that safety and the psychological safety, trauma informed, all of those things create this, you know, like really high powered trampoline. I love trampolines. I don't know if that's my thing, this whole trampoline thing, up to this, what might be considered specifically academic development. But again, academic development is not siloed. It is correlated and interweaved into this social emotional intelligence and psychological safety. I mean, everything's dependent on the other. So I think by pushing forward this concept of building relationships and SEL and all those things, nothing's going to be missing. The only thing we're going to do is strengthen our academic scores and improvements, or however they're going to measure that, because you're putting them in a safe place. I mean, you're allowing their executive function to run wild, and you're hopefully calming their amygdala response, and everything's up their brain, and all it's going to do is just take off. And so that's kind of my thought on that, is that it's not siloed, it's interdependent of each other. And that is a question, not that specifically, but when I get kind of pushback on, but if you do this, you will miss out on all of this. If you focus on relationships, you're going to lose academic structure. And I think that's so wrong, because you focus on relationships, and academics are kind of this bonus that kind of start naturally occurring within all of that. But it's just not two separate pieces.
Yes. I love that, Chelsea, that you're saying that. You actually described the aspirational model that I have in my book that's coming out in 2021, about advancing social and emotional learning in schools, where at the bottom, we have maybe academics over here, and then maybe some social emotional over here, if it's even there. In some places it's incomplete. And then it
Right.
might just be incongruent, it could be inconsistent, it could be incomplete, but where we want to get it to is integrated. So yeah, 2021, advancing social emotional learning in schools. Yeah, like you could have written that chapter the way you just described it. Beautiful.
Excellent. I'll just take that chapter. You do the rest. It'll be
That's
fine.
right. No problem.
I know. But that's just kind of a big piece for me, because people tend to really like that soapbox is, well, you're going to lose academic development. Well, I think you're wrong. And here's why. Here's my soapbox to challenge your soapbox. I have no problems. But again, I think that we have it backwards. I think we're saying that we're going to focus on academics. And then once all the academics are done, if we see any social emotional needs that happen, then we'll address them after we focus academics. But I think we need to flip it. And it's we focus on social emotional and academics come.
I love that, because if we address it, by the time we're going to wait for it to get there and it happens and we're addressing it, usually we're already in a reactive state. Correct. By that point, we're trying to deal with bullying, that's developed. We're trying, because we have, not good relationship skills amongst kids or even teachers. And we're always in this reactive mode, but we want it to be more proactive, for sure.
Right. Why do we only want to react? We want to be proactive in academics, but we're totally fine with being reactive in social emotional intelligence and those types of things, which doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
No. I mean, in the worst case scenario, without the address of the social emotional learning and skill development in kids, if we don't develop those skills in kids, they could have types of problems at some point that, unfortunately, in some cases land kids in jail, or they turn 18 and they're caught in this, negative way of being and relating to other people because they didn't have that earlier, when those neural pathways were being established the way you described earlier.
Yeah. Lily says social emotional skills are leadership skills, and we need that. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're learning how to work in a collaborative environment with yourself, because you have to listen to yourself all day. I don't know if you have to do that, but I get really loud. So that's a problem, but that's a different problem. And then you're also learning how to be collaborative with the people around you, which translates into these leadership skills, how you're leading the people around you through modeling and all of that. And Julie says, say it louder for the people in the back. And I tend to every day and all day.
Yes, absolutely. I think we have a great opportunity right now, Chelsea, to just invest and make those, make those changes now.
Right, because I think, we've been having this conversation for a while. Everybody's a little less risk adverse because we're just tired collectively, right? So if someone comes in and says, you know what if we focus on SEL? And I think even if it's just out of pure exhaustion, if the school staff says, all right, fine, like, why not? I will take it. I don't care why you say yes. As long as you say yes, I'm in on that one.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, here's one I missed.
Yeah.
Christopher Holmes says, many times if we're not prioritizing or addressing social emotional needs, we may be creating social emotional problems, which is kind of what you were talking about in that sense. And then we're being reactive again, because we're not proactively addressing them. We're then reactively having to kind of band-aid them in some way, because we're now having these neural pathways that are harmful rather than helpful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, I wanted to mention there's an international initiative coming up that this group might be interested in. And It's actually International SEL Day. It is coming up March 26th. It's a Friday, 2021. This is the second year that it's happening. I participated last year. It was started by David Adams and the Urban Assembly out of New York City. And it is an initiative to kind of get everyone aware. Yes, March 26th, International SEL Day. It's to get people aware about what is social emotional learning, why is it important, what does that look like? And so if you go to selday.org, you will see all about that day. It's free to participate, and there are lots of things being planned, lots of sharing to be going on, and resources and support for developing SEL in schools, not just in the US, but last year there were 35 countries and more than 2 million people reached with that event. So if you want to take a peek, it was really cool participating last year, and I plan to do it again this
That's
week.
really cool. I had not heard of it, and
Yep.
I want like a t-shirt. Like what do I decorate with for this day?
They actually have, you can actually get like, I think they call it, oh, I don't know what they call it. What do they call that? Not a badge, but kind of like a little frame that you can put on your little
for
Facebook
your
page.
profile, like a profile frame.
Yeah, there's a couple of little things for profiles saying, SEL Day, and, you can participate like that. There are going to be lots of different free resources and sharing and opportunities to connect with other people who are finding this really important at this time. So
I love that. Yeah. And who did you say was organizing the event? Who had kind of started it?
The Urban Assembly, which is a school out of New York City.
Oh, wow.
Their former director of social emotional learning, David Adams, he's now the director of strategic initiatives, I think, but he coordinated that, and lots of organizations and people. Like I said, it just kind of caught fire last year all around the world. So
that's very cool. I'm really excited about that, and I'm going to put it on my calendar because that sounds really amazing. So I feel like this has been a super conversation, and there are so many soapboxes intertwined into this. Yeah. We could just go off on, and you've already kind of mentioned your book, but is there any kind of thing that we haven't covered that you want to wrap us up with?
Well, I'm happy that you all are here, interested in learning about all of these types of things, because it's really the best thing for our kids, right? You talk about the kids or the future, and we need to be paying attention to what those needs are now proactively, so that we don't have to be dealing with as much chaos and heartbreak later. So definitely support that, and stay aware of that. We know that parents can't do it alone. I think Julie mentioned that earlier. Parents can't just, parents offer and support as their way as parents, and we all learn important things from our parents for sure. But there's no denying that, teachers are first responders now. Kids are coming to school.
Oh, absolutely.
And
yes.
So the teaching teams, the counselors at the school, the social workers, the psychologists, the principals, assistant principals, we're frontline. They're, responders, and kids are coming with all kinds of things that are really interfering with their ability to learn. And so, I think we might also need to take a look at teacher preparation as well, and see how much more do we need to put into that deliberately in our teacher preparation programs to be able to fortify folks who are going into the classroom to be able to respond to what kids are bringing in the door.
Yeah, because that's a whole other conversation that we need to have. Is we want these environments to be created. We want trauma-informed, psychologically safe environments. We know that they're needed. We know that we need relationships. We know that we need to create a sense of belonging for their students. And that's a big ask. So what does it look like to create a space where the teachers can do that and still care for themselves. I mean, that's a huge undertaking. And so that's a different conversation that we'll have to get into.
Yeah, I'm all for self-care. And I can tell you, having been an administrator, there's, we want teachers to, take care of themselves and have, self-care. But as a leader, I can tell you, I felt it was just as much, if not more, my responsibility as the leader of the culture in the building to support all things self-care for the teachers, because we're asking such a huge task for our teachers these days. And so it's not just, take care of yourself. It's let's create an environment at the leadership level that supports that, because the teachers can't do for the kids what can't
being done for them.
Exactly.
And that, I just had that conversation yesterday. Actually, I'm speaking at an event at the end of February called Leaders Lounge, and I'm talking on this concept of round teams instead of hierarchical teams, and what that looks like. Because if you have the focus, you have the students at the middle, and then you have the closest to the students who works out, so the teachers and then the administrators, directors, and those types of things. And the people who are on the outside are the support, and they just support inward until all the way that we're supporting the students in the middle. But kind of what's unique about that is we're not talking about all the power or all of the, reporting or all that going upwards. Rather, we're talking about it going inwards. So we want all of our support and everything that we're doing going towards the students. And the closer we get to students, the closer we get to the teachers. And that's just, anyway, I'm doing this training on that, and it's one of the closest to my heart, really, because I've seen it happen. I've seen it work. I've seen what it looks like when leadership and administration supports the teachers who are supporting the kids. And I mean, it's the most impactful thing that you will do.
Absolutely.
So if you guys, anybody who's here is interested in that, if you are not already subscribe to my newsletter on leylandgrowth.com. Go and check that out, subscribe to it, and I'll be sending out my link on that, because I think that's transformational. It really is. And then Michael shared some resource here for Learning Pathmakers, which is also a really awesome organization. And so be sure to check that out. But this was awesome. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. Can I just say I'm super thankful that I pushed the go live button. Because that would have been unfortunate. Surely we would have noticed that nobody was interacting. We'd have been like, something's off.
What could go wrong?
I'm so many things, and that's the fun. And Adam, that style of leadership is really my favorite. I mean, that's because what I would want. And so if that's what I would want, then that's what I want to provide. But anyway, thank you guys all for being here. This was a great conversation. We had some amazing feedback from y'all. You made it all better and just kind of moved us along on all of our soapboxes, which I love soapboxes, as you know. So it's a great time. And be sure to sign Michael's petition. Yes, it's fine. Because we're all going to go off and change the world. And tomorrow the What Could Go Wrong theme song comes out. Okay. At 1 p.m. Central Time, Rachel and I will be dancing, and it's going to be a great time. So straight from social emotional learning and like serious deep conversation into dancing and theme songs. So we're all about the dancing here. So again, thank you guys for hanging out. Thank you, Elaine, for having this amazing conversation. And we've already decided we're going to do part 2, how we're supporting the educators who are supporting the children. So just work on that.
Definitely.
Thank you guys. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks.